Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. I do have a guest. She's not necessarily a guest expert from the parenting world, but she is an expert on things that I think we are all working on. My guest today is Emma Nadler. She's the author of a new memoir that just came out called The Unlikely Village of Eden. And it is about her journey with her daughter and her family and her life, really, on discovering that her daughter had a genetic abnormality, a genetic deletion, I think it's called, and also along the way, many other medical challenges and developmental challenges. And just her journey on, this discovery, her process of finding her way, her process of grief, and her letting go of perfection, and really, being forced to get the support that she needed along the way. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. We talk about the book a little bit, and I have to say that having read the book, Emma underplays the struggles that she and her family went through along the road, and it was pretty intense end of struggle with a child with such intense medical and developmental special needs. The interesting thing why I wanted to bring her on is there is a continuum of struggle, right? There's a continuum of struggle in the parenting, in parenting and in parenting our extra kids. And I just loved as Emma's wisdom. I actually got sent her book by her, you'll hear me talk about this, by her publicist to get lots and lots of people wanting to come on the podcast. And I just thought I'll take a look at the first page. And 24 hours later, I'd finished the book and reached out and said, yes, I'd love to have her come on the podcast. I could not put the book down, y'all. It was such a lovely, wonderful, inspiring memoir. Anyhow, let's meet Emma. She's going to talk a bit about her book and about her experience. And I think, as I said, we're all somewhere on this continuum of struggle in our lives as parents. And Emma really can provide for us a lot of insight and how she managed to actually write a joyful and hopeful book out of this struggle that she experienced and still experiences today. So let's meet Emma. Hey, Emma, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I am an author and a psychotherapist.
So the name of your book is The Unlikely Village of Eden. And when did it come out?
Today.
It's oh my
out
goodness.
Today.
All right. So
by
the time people hear this,
okay.
it will already be out, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. And I have to tell you, the reason why you're here is because I think your publicist reached out to me.
Yeah.
And I get so many people sending me books and emailing, can I come on your podcast? And most of the time I just say, no, thank you, best wishes. That's my standard answer. But I thought your book looked interesting. So I started reading it. It was like 4:00 on a Tuesday. And I could not put it down. Like, I read it in 24 hours. Like, honestly, it was such a wonderful book. I loved it so much. And before I even finished, I wrote back and I'm like, yes, please. Can she please come on the podcast? So I loved your book. I did. I really, really loved it so much. So would you mind just telling the listeners just a little bit about what your book is about?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a memoir. Thank you for reading it. And I'm so thrilled. It's always so great to hear when it resonated with a reader. And it's just really exciting for me. So yeah, the book is called The Unlikely Village of Eden. And it is about when life doesn't go to plan. And it's about recalibrating when life doesn't go to plan It's about my experience as a caregiver to my daughter who was born with a rare genetic deletion, and how that unexpected path influenced and redefined our family, my experience with motherhood, and myself. And at its core, it's really about challenging perfectionism. It's about various forms of love. And I hope it's about bucking cultural norms as well.
Tell me more, say more about bucking cultural norms.
Yeah. Well, I think that as mothers, we are handed so many messages about perfection, about how good we need to be, how much we need to give, how shiny we should look and feel. And I'm really interested in challenging that and creating more of a realistic narrative of what it's like to be a mom,
Mm-hmm.
and more realistic expectations for ourselves about what motherhood is. And but I think those expectations, I think sometimes we internalize them, like, oh, I'm such a perfectionist. But I think that the truth is we live in a culture that hands us that, so it's not our
Yeah.
fault.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do this, we didn't invent this. It's not that we're just hard on
Yeah.
ourselves.
Nobody wakes up and says, I just really want to be hard on myself today
Right.
and really try to be perfect and then beat myself up when I'm not.
Exactly. And but yet I think that we sometimes don't fully see just how much those messages impact, I would say, like, every mom in some
Mm-hmm.
way. It just
Mm-hmm.
hits every mom, this story of perfectionism.
Well, okay, so that's why I wanted to. The whole time I was reading your book, I was thinking about if you don't know like much about my work, the people in my community generally have. I mean, there are. Let me back up a little bit. I believe that there are kids who are. I call them the 80% of kids who are just like pretty much generally like fairly easygoing. They go put their shoes on when you tell them to go and put their shoes on, and they walk away with you when you say it's time to leave the park. And then there are the kids that I call like the 20% who are like just much more challenging, strong willed, maybe neurodivergent kids. Like those are the kids that you have to be like extra intentional about with your parenting, right? The 80% of kids you can kind of just be like relatively kind and consistent and you're not going to have any trouble. Those the parents of those people, when I say I'm a parenting coach, look at me like I have two heads. Like, why would anyone ever need a parenting coach, right? And then the 20% parents of those kids are like, oh my gosh, I could have used you. And I, when my kids were going, that kind of split, right?
Yes.
So for people who haven't read your book, having Eden with her genetic deletion put you at like the very, very extreme end of having challenges as a parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what the whole time I was reading your book, I was thinking like this is just like a continuum of some people who have like an easier time and then some people who have a harder time as parents, and you're at the further end of the harder time with more challenges with
Yeah.
her health problems and feeding challenges and things. But it's still a continuum, and I guess I'm curious, how much of this do you think you would have learned if you didn't have a child? I feel like we're having a conversation that people aren't in on because I've read your book and you've lived your life.
Yeah.
So I feel like we need to back up a little
Okay.
bit and talk
Great.
about
Great.
more about your experience. So maybe, let's talk some more about imperfection, because I think that what I read in your book was that you had this idea of motherhood or parenthood and what it was going to look like. And then having a child with challenges blew that completely out of the water. And why I started talking about my community was that happens a lot with people in my community, even if their kid doesn't have like major health problems, even if it's just like extremely sensitive or extremely strong willed, there's like grieving process. And we talk about that a lot in my community, this grieving process of this isn't what I thought it was going to be like. This is so much harder than I thought it was going to be. Like, I feel bad at this. I feel like a failure. Like, this is all like I just was picking up so much of that in your book that I think happens with a lot of parents. So maybe what have you learned that you think would be helpful for other parents who are on this journey of feeling that way and feeling like that grief or feeling alone? Because that's another theme in your book that I loved about the village and the community.
Yeah. And I think but I think what you were talking about with that spectrum and how there is relatability there. Like, even if you don't have a child with severe autism or a child with, a really serious medical challenges, I think there is this part of it that is still relatable around. And I've heard that from early readers in my book. Like, most people don't have my specific experience, but but the the pressures and the expectations that I had, I think that is relatable. That I thought it would be one way and I thought it would be easier, and it wasn't. And I
Mm-hmm.
think many parents can really get that piece, and many humans can really get that piece about life. It might not even be parenting. So I think that I didn't even know the expectations that I had for parenthood until I got the news about my daughter's rare genetic deletion. I did not even know the life that I thought that I was imagining. It wasn't even in my conscious mind how many parts of her life, my daughter Eden's life, I had envisioned, that she might have, choose to have children someday if she wanted to, or that she might go to college, or that she might live independently. I think a lot of our expectations sometimes aren't even conscious. And then when
Well, you're
I,
soaking in it. Like
yeah,
it's like what you were
yeah,
talking about before. And nobody wakes up thinking I'm going to be a perfectionist because we're
yes,
just soaking it. We're soaking in like everything we see on TV and Instagram and in movies and whatever. There's this definitely like standard North American family ideal.
yes, yes, definitely. Right. And so this definitely shattered that for me. And sometimes in the shattering of something, there is also a chance to rebuild. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in that really deep grief that I went through and still sometimes go through, and I always like to say that because I don't want to portray that I've reached this arrival point of
You're
ex-
enlightened and fixed. Yeah.
exactly, because how does that serve us? And it's not true. And I'm really interested in telling the truth. And it doesn't serve us, to say, well, wow, I've arrived here when I haven't. But I have come to more acceptance. I have. And I have grown through this experience, and it has shaped me. And so it's, yeah, the shattering means that there's a chance to rebuild. And I feel really grateful that I was able to find people to help me rebuild with.
So how did you do that? I mean, what helps if you're talking to another parent out there who's really relating to this and really is resonating and they feel alone and like that they're like a failure, that they're grieving? What would you say to them? Where to start?
Well, I would say to them, you're definitely not alone. And even in your feeling alone, that's what connects you to others who also feel alone. And and I would say that, and I would really hope that they could reach out to one person, to
Mm-hmm.
someone that has shown them that they care, someone who has shown them that they're trustworthy enough to share their experience with. I would hope that they would reach out. I think if someone's really feeling alone, I hope that they would reach out to a therapist and get help. And I think there's many ways to do that. I think that, if someone's in a desperate state, there's 988 and there's the National Crisis Lifeline, which I think people need to know about. It's really
Mm-hmm.
important. That resource in the United States is available for people. And because, yeah, I think in this world, in this sort of post pandemic world, it's easy to feel alone as a mom and to feel like other people have it figured out. And I really want to say that I don't think other people have it figured out. I just think they, for whatever reason, can present that way. And
Mm-hmm.
and so I would encourage them to really keep going and to look for those resources, and really to pursue therapy or to pursue support group or just pursue other moms who get it. I would really, just to not be alone in it is really important.
There's a tool, Hand in Hand Parenting is a nonprofit parenting organization. And the founder of it developed a tool called listening partnerships, where you just find somebody else and she says once a week for an hour, or you each have half an hour, and you're instructed to do nothing but listen to the other person. Like each person gets half an hour,
Mm.
and you don't give advice and you don't give commentary. You just listen to each other for half an hour each, or whatever time you've decided on. But I think that's a really beautiful thing. If therapy, I know a lot of people, therapy feels out of reach, but just, I think that's a big part of therapy, right? Is someone who listens to you with compassion.
Yes, I love that. And I think there are many ways to, yeah, have groups of people. In my book I talk about this mamas group that I started in in my life because I did not know other moms when I many other moms when I started to have my children, and I did feel alone, and I wanted to gather with women and sit and talk about the hard stuff, talk about the good stuff, laugh, whatever. And so I did start this mamas group, and people came and we sat in a circle, and they were there at my book launch. And that was, we started that about a decade ago. So, I mean, it can happen. We can create things that we need and help, because a lot of people, if you're wanting other connection, yeah, other people want that too. That's the thing. Is like
Yeah.
you won't have to look far in any way to find people who want just that.
Something, just to go back to something else, when I was asking you like where to start, one thing I noticed in your book is sometimes where you start is just accepting the connection and saying yes to people who want to, like, I'm thinking about your neighbor, that your gardening neighbor, who, like, when I was reading your book, I could hear the hesitation, that you were always like, are you sure that you don't mind the kids being over? Are you sure you don't mind planting the flowers for us? Like that was sort of a theme that I saw in the people that came into your life, was that these people would present themselves and you weren't quite sure. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like you were hesitant to let people support you. And I think that's really common too, that a lot of times people think, oh, well, they couldn't really mean it, or they don't really care, or, and then that perpetuates that aloneness cycle. So I don't know. I guess I just wanted to say sometimes it's not even asking for support or asking for connection. It's just saying yes to the people who are already there offering it.
That's a great point, Sarah. And I really am with you in this, that often someone will offer. And when I said yes, then I also allowed them to be a part of something as well, right? Like when we accept help, it can also help the person who is helping. And that's how I justify it, at least. But it really does. And it's, being a part of that web of helping and being helped. And yeah, I know a lot of people struggle with that. They go, "Oh, no, 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 you don't need to do that." And I would really recommend, if someone offers, say yes. I mean, again, and I support, everybody has to have their own boundaries, and I think that of course each case has to be seen on a case by case basis. But for me, and what I can say is that when I did say yes and I allowed that help, I felt really cared for and bolstered. And and I had been one of those people who had been more like, no, 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 we're good, like we're good. But when we had Eden, I was really, really humbled, and I did need the help because we really had our hands full. She was she was critically ill. She was in and out of the hospital. And that caused me to let in the help and see, oh wow, like look how much better my life is when I do say yes. And I got to have that experience. And now I mean, she's not critically ill. And now she does live on a feeding tube, and there's still a lot of challenges that we face. But I'm still saying yes because I want those connections, and I'm still offering to help others too. I mean, I think this works really well when in the different seasons of our life we can be helped and help, when we can be in multiple roles.
Hmm. Okay. A, that I want to come back to the idea of the village and community, but B, what you were just talking about is again another example of, because of the extremeness of your situation, you were forced to say yes because you literally couldn't have done it without the help that you had,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Like, so that's like another example of sort of like, you were you were forced into the grief and you had to deal with it. You were forced into the idea that your family wasn't going to be like this perfect little, you know, two kids, mom and dad, white picket fence ideal that we always see.
Yeah.
And also that you needed the support.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then through getting in the habit of saying yes, and that built the relationships, and it did. I think it boosted my connections with people, and then it felt easier to continue to engage in, over time, mutually beneficial relationships of being helped and helping.
Yeah, and that's what was reminding me of the village. You call it the village, and I think of like community and how rare it is for people today to live in community with each other, where you actually like, not more than know your neighbors, that you can ask people for things and they do things for you. And I don't know, I thought that was really beautiful. That resonated for me personally because I live in a really small community and it's unusually tight knit in good ways and bad ways sometimes because we're all on top of each other.
Yeah.
But we did have this experience where we moved across country for 6 months for a job for my husband. And this is when my youngest was born. And when it came time to move back, we did the classic thing of like not leaving enough time to get packed up for the moving truck that was coming at 7 in the morning or whatever, and didn't know anyone to ask for help. But I was thinking if we were back, where we're moving back to, we could have put out an email to the group eServe, the group list, and had 15 neighbors over here,
Mm.
helping us pack. And I just, I think, I don't know why I'm going off on a bit of a tangent about community, but I think once you know what it's like to live in community, it's really hard to imagine not. And I feel for people who just feel alone and don't have that sense of, that community that they've either created or that they find themselves in.
Yeah, and I think that's more the case than not, to feel alone, especially I think after the pandemic, or yeah, I mean now we can say after, right? The
I hope
that's
so.
been, at least right
Is
now,
it
that's where it's
official? I
at.
was
Yeah,
thinking about that today.
it was the World Health Organization
Okay.
did make that proclamation. But it isn't over in the sense that COVID still affects our lives, right? And I think especially as parents and mothers, and the aftermath of that. So I don't know if it's as much of a before and after story maybe as we make it with COVID.
It does feel like that. But I think
Yeah,
you're right that it has affected how we gather
yeah,
and, see each other. And I hope we get back to people wanting to do things in person because now that we've done so much online,
yeah.
I have noticed more of a resistance of people wanting to go back to in-person things.
Yes. And so I mean, with the community piece, I mean, we have a village to raise Eden, and I feel tremendously grateful for that. And I still think I'm continuing to build my community because I think in this world is not easy. And because I'm a caregiver, I spend so much time at home. And so it still can be isolating. And I really want to say that for the caregivers out there, especially, that it's not just you. We spend a lot of time. My daughter with her severe autism, it's hard for her to go places. I know that many parents who have kids with autism experience that, where it's difficult to be out in the community, and that limits what we can do. And then my daughter also has her medical challenges with the feeding tube, and there's a lot to manage with that. So we can't just like go out all day. There's things we have to prepare, and there's just a whole protocol for her medical needs. So it's a long way to say, yeah, I think it's kind of a both and. I feel like we've created this really beautiful village for her and with her, and sometimes I'm still tucked away at home and a little more isolated, and I know that that's not a unique experience for parents or caregivers, and I'm going to keep reaching out and keep building my community, and I really hope that others will do the same.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think that's the key, right? Is that the community's there for if you're reaching out for it.
Yeah.
There has to be both building it and using it, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it has
Yeah.
to be, it's an active thing.
Hmm.
And like, but it's not the town square like we used to have, right? Like it's not, or for most people it's not. And maybe if you live in a small town and you might have that. But I think for most of us, like one of my dearest friends lives half a country away. And I talk with her most days on the phone, and she's a really big part of my life, but we live in different places. So that's, not this old world vision, but she is a part of my village, and I will absolutely consider her just, I mean, she's so essential in my life. And I write about her in the memoir and how she moved and how devastating that was for her to live somewhere else. But then I found that we were really able to connect long distance in a way that we might not connect here, which is also really mind blowing
That's
because
interesting. Yeah.
because we live in different places, we make such an effort. I'm never going to run into her at a school event or out in the neighborhood. I'm not going to run into her. So we have to be really intentional about, hey, let's do what we do, walk and talks, and I put on my headphones and I just walk around the neighborhood and talk with her and catch up. And we do that a lot because it works for us. And I don't know if we lived in the same place if we'd have that much time together. And then we
Yeah.
go and visit each other when we can. And we'll spend long chunks of time together when we're, have conversations that last a day, where I wouldn't do that either. If I had a friend here, maybe I see them for an hour for a coffee. But I
Hmm.
don't spend the whole day with most of my friends. I'd love to. I just don't have the
Hmm.
kind of life that usually lends itself to that, and neither do they. And so I just want to think really broadly about what a village can be.
Hmm.
And I really want people to think about also like unlikely people that might be contenders for that connection. Like my neighbor who's in her 70s, she's part of our village. She has more time because she's retired, and she's a retired cardiac and ICU nurse, and we really connected. But I you have to be open to it, right? Like, I mean, you got to be. It doesn't, like, maybe not everyone in your village is going to be like in the same spot as you in life with the same ages of kids. I don't. That's hard to have all that line up.
We have in our little village in our neighborhood, we're actually the young ones in our community, believe it or not. We have a couple people. We have our one neighbor on one side who's a early 70s retired Catholic priest, Joe, who like comes over for like the kids' birthday dinners, and it's kind of like their uncle almost. We have on our other side this wacky gardener, musician, Englishman who's in his 80s now, who's been in my kids' lives their whole growing up. They had there's these people, these unlikely parts of our village that I'm so grateful for. And if we didn't live so close together, we might not have known them as well, but it's been such a gift.
Yes, that's really great to hear about. I like those examples so much, and that's exactly what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing you just brought up, which I think is so key, is the role of chance and meeting the people who can become our fellow villagers.
Mm-hmm.
The role of chance that just you moved into this house, or you live in this house, or they moved in and you live near each other, and you might not have met them
Yeah, we never
otherwise.
would have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that I have met along the way that are in the book that were absolutely because of sheer chance. And maybe it was chance with the side of asking for help, because I did, in one of the most beloved relationships and parts of the book, is when we met a caregiver who's a nurse, whose name is Julie, who has really, with her husband, come into our lives as a kind of extended family. And and I met her because I said to my supervisor, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to stay at work anymore. I just don't know if I can do this. And so she connected us, but it was because, so I did say the thing that needed to be said. I did say, I'm having this challenge, but it was pure chance in a way that brought us to that moment. And and I think that's also important to say, because we never know the people in our lives that are just going to absolutely change us and become our beloved people. And I think that's really exciting. because who knows, like tomorrow you could meet someone who just like changes your life. And I love leaning into that mystery because I think there's so much possibility in that.
Yeah, and it's about, again, the theme of like saying yes and staying open, right?
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you just a little bit more about I want to talk a little bit more about the grief piece and the perfectionism piece, because I just think that's so relatable for so many parents. What was your path for that grief piece, and how did you move through it and sort of accept it, I guess?
Yeah, we could take a lot of time on this one. It's been a long road with the grief. It's been a long road. I really love Dr. Pauline Boss's work on ambiguous loss. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to check out ambiguousloss.com. Dr. Pauline Boss is a researcher and was a professor at the University of Minnesota who coined this term. And it's a loss that has no closure. It's a loss that may never be resolved. It may never, it lacks some sort of information or ending, and it's ambiguous in that way. And that learning about that did help me to understand the type of grief that I was experiencing and gave it a name, because there's a lot out there on grief that's around death, and we need that. We need those resources. I mean, that's such a monumental loss. And yet there are many other types of losses, and grief can be about a lot of other things. And so I found that work helpful. And yeah, I went through a a lot of feelings and still do. I don't think grief is something that just gets resolved. We don't like check it off our list. We're not like, great, glad I'm done with that grief. It's something that resurfaces sometimes in unexpected ways. And it's something that I think I've learned more how to live with it.
Corey, who works with me, she's one of my coaches. She talks about grief like if you kind of just expect it to show up, like, oh, here you are again. And if you can kind of like be gentle with it and not be so surprised when it does show up, that especially in our community when we talk about, how hard it can be parenting, and just, okay, here's another one of those moments where I look at the people at the grocery store whose kids are just like walking along nicely next to them in the cart or whatever, and mine are laying on the floor screaming.
Next to mine. They're right next to
Yeah.
mine. Everybody's
And
screaming. Yeah.
just giving yourself that compassion for
Yeah.
when it shows up.
Yeah. Right. I also love Kristen Neff's work and Chris Germer on self-compassion. And you can, research those resources as well. I found that to be.
Kristen was on our podcast.
She was. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
fabulous.
yeah.
Yeah.
We
So
talk about self-compassion a whole lot over here.
excellent. Excellent. Yeah. It definitely, those tools really helped me, as they have helped so many people. There's so much research on those tools, and how much they can normalize and bring relief to difficult feelings. So yeah, I also found that to be helpful in facing the the largeness, the vastness of grief.
What did you find helpful with the perfection piece? You talk about that a lot in your book, or coming to terms with not being perfect and being hard on yourself. When you find that coming up for yourself now, because I'm sure it still does, as it does for all of us, what do you find helps you in those moments?
Well, one thing that helps me is cracking a joke. A lot of times we use a lot of humor around here, and you'll find that in the book, The Unlikely Village of Eden. Full of it's full of humor, because that's one of the ways that I've been able to get through, and that helps brighten a day that otherwise can feel really heavy and serious. So that's one of the pieces that have helped me. I think also surrounding myself with people who get that, who get what it's like, the pressures of perfectionism, who grapple with it themselves. We can talk about it, having those
Mm-hmm.
conversations. I'm definitely like more open about it. then, well, now I'm really open about it. It's like,
Yeah, you
here's my,
certainly are,
yeah,
Emma.
yeah.
Now that it's all out there in
Yeah,
black and
here it
white, all of
is. It's all there. And I'm happy with that. I really am.
a beautiful book. Like,
Yeah.
it is really, honestly, like, I read a lot. I'm not like an expert or anything, but I read a lot. And so I was like, I'll just look at this book, and really, like, honestly grabbed me the first 5 pages. And I kept saying to Corey, like, we text during the day. I'm like, I can't put this book down.
Oh,
Like, I'm not doing all of the other things that I'm meant to be doing right now. I just can't put it down.
thank you.
So
So I'm
thanks for
so
writing it.
glad that it resonated, and I am hearing from people that it is a quick read. Like, people are kind of tearing through it because I think there are just some really relatable themes here.
Absolutely.
And I think that just to continue that conversation about perfectionism, I think the other thing that helps me is getting out into nature and trying to connect with a spiritual practice of some kind. And that can look so differently for each person. I happen to be Jewish. That resonates with me. There's as many pathways to this as there are people. I never think there's one right way to find some connection to, maybe to the greater good, or to purpose. And I don't think that needs to be narrowly defined, but I think that that's also been helpful to me in grappling with these themes.
I think for me, it's like the work that I do and community with parents, and just, I don't know, it's so just feeling connection. Like, it just, to me, it's all about connection. And I think connection is kind of the opposite of perfection, right? Or
Yes.
it's like a good antidote to perfection is when you feel connected with other people and you see that you're not alone in your flaws and your, imperfections, that everybody else has those too.
Yeah, for sure. And Brene Brown's work has been really influential for me and for so many others. And yeah, I mean, I think the way to connect is to show our humanity. And that's probably what people are enjoying about my book, is that I am, yeah, it's like, here I am. This is what's happening. And I think we all want that. We just want to see people. We want to be seen for who we really are. I think that's what, there's like a human craving that we have within us for that.
Yeah. It's reminding me of, a high school English class being taught that, the more specific you get with your writing, the more universal it is, right?
Oh,
Do you remember being taught that
yes, I
in school?
do.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's perfect example of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to close out with a question that I ask all my guests, which is, if you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger parent self, what would you tell yourself?
This is a great question. I would probably say to myself, it's going to get easier. It's not always going to be this way. It's going to change. And even though it feels like it won't, or that it will always be this hard, it won't. It will change, and you will change. And I think I would give myself that reassurance.
That's very comforting.
Thanks. Yeah, it's helpful for me right now. I should say that to
Yeah,
myself more often.
that's right. Write it on a Post-it note and stick it to your computer monitor.
Totally.
Thanks so much, Emma.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, Sarah. Thank you for having me on the podcast. And yeah, I'm just really glad we got to have this time together.
Me too. And we'll put links to your book and all the resources that each of us have mentioned in the show notes for listeners to find.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.